continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by the Alpha Wealth Group, bringing the trilogy of estate, tax, and investment planning together. Visit alphawealthgroup.com for a free report.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump delivering a speech on the economy before the Economic Club of New York yesterday, summarizing his first 3 years in office.
I refuse to accept that Americans had to lower their expectations or give up on their dreams. America is the single greatest country in the world, and I knew that working together, we could make it even greater. In 2016, I stood before you, supremely confident in what our people could achieve if government stopped punishing American workers and started promoting American workers and American companies. Our middle class was being crushed under the weight of a punitive tax code, oppressive regulations, one-sided trade deals, and an economic policy that put America's interest last, and a very deep last at that. I knew that if we lifted these burdens from our economy and unleashed our people to pursue their ambitions and realize their limitless potential, then economic prosperity would come thundering back to our country at a record speed. That's what's happening. Today, I'm proud to stand before you as President of the United States to report that we have delivered on our promises and exceeded our expectations by a very wide margin.
What have unleashed Americans achieved over the last 3 years?
Manufacturing was supposed to be dead in our country. You would need, according to a past administration representative, at the highest level of that past administration, you would need a magic wand to bring back manufacturing jobs. Well, we brought them back, and we brought them back to over 600,000 manufacturing jobs as of today.
Is it just the rich getting richer?
Nearly 7 million people have been lifted off, very importantly, food stamps. 7 million people off of food stamps. And we're getting Americans off of welfare and back into the workforce. Nearly 2.5 million Americans have risen out of poverty. That's a record. The rate of African American and Hispanic American families in poverty has plummeted to the lowest level ever recorded.
And how about some comparisons over the last two administrations? 3, including the Trump administration, as it pertains to median household income. You know, middle-income families, how are they doing?
American wages, salaries, and incomes are rising very fast. Median household income is now at the highest level in the history of our country. The average median income under President Bush rose only $400 over an 8-year period. Under President Obama, it rose $975 over an 8-year period. And under my administration, it rose $5,000 over slightly more than just 2.5 years. That's a big difference.
And it doesn't include the purchasing power difference.
In addition to the $5,000, we have to add $2,200 for the tax cuts, average tax cuts, and $2,000 to $3,000 for regulatory and energy cuts. So that would be a total of almost $10,000 versus $400 and versus $975.
Making more, paying less in taxes, unless you're in a high tax state, and hey, that's the choice you made, that's the life you chose. and increasing your purchasing power. I'll tell you what, not to mention people being able to lift themselves out of dependency and into productivity. That's a pretty good rundown for a Russian asset, I'd say. Pretty good idea. Pretty good for this country, considering the guy's being run by Putin, as I understand it, from the left. And President Trump addressed the left in his close because all that's been achieved, that is not guaranteed.
But everything that we've achieved is under threat from the left-wing ideology that demands absolute conformity, relentless regulation, and a top-down control of the entire U.S. economy. Far-left politicians in our nation's capital want a massive government takeover of health care. They want to give government bureaucrats domination over every aspect of your business and your life. They want to eliminate American oil and natural gas. They want to enlist us in global projects designed to redistribute American wealth and kill American jobs all over our nation. Washington's Democrats and their radical agenda of socialism would demolish our economy, reinstate the avalanche of regulations that have already ended, decimate the middle class, and totally bankrupt our nation. As long as I'm president, America will never be a socialist country.
That's a nice follow-on our discussion at the end of last hour on the 30th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Kristian Niemietz. She is the head of political economy at the Institute of Economic Affairs, author of Universal Healthcare Without the NHS, Towards a Patient-Centered Health System, and Socialism, the Failed Idea That Never Dies. Dr. Niemietz, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I think I said she. I'm sorry.
Right.
I was looking at Nikki Haley, who we have at the top of the next hour. I apologize for that.
No worries.
Dr. Niemietz, so what President Trump had to say amid all the bluster about impeachment and everything else, sort of coming back to a theme he started with over the summer and is now revisiting, which is, hey, this is a choice between a centrally planned economy and at least something that approaches a respect for free minds and free markets.
Sorry, say again. The connection is pretty poor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you hear me? Dr. Niemietz, can you hear us? I was just asking what you think about President Trump framing this choice in 2020 as a choice between the socialism the left is promoting in so many quarters and the capitalism and the results of it that he was describing.
All right. Well, I don't know the exact policy program of whoever he's going to run against. But it seems to me socialists on your side of the pond in the United States are trying to have it both ways at the moment. You've got people who advocate proper socialism, a system like in Venezuela, even though they probably wouldn't mention that example for PR reasons. And then you get people like Bernie Sanders talking about Denmark and Sweden as positive examples. But of course, those are not socialist economies. Those are capitalist economies with fairly high taxes, but they're still clearly market-based. They have private enterprise, market mechanisms, market prices. So it seems like they can't really make up their mind what they actually want.
And, I mean, think about what is being proposed in so many quarters, as President Trump mentioned, the takeover of the American health insurance and, by extension, care system as modeled after, I guess, the UK would be, or Canada would be the closest approximations. Think about some of those proposals against the backdrop of this 30th anniversary we just celebrated, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and what lessons from the 1980s are not being remembered or being purposely discarded by so many politicians in the West.
Well, as loads of those, I don't think we've ever properly learned the right lessons from the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's just that the division of Germany into a capitalist and a socialist part was a natural experiment of sorts. You had almost identical starting conditions, and then one part of it became one of the world's economic powerhouses, and the other one became a shortage economy. The reason for that is, of course, that it showed that you cannot replace market prices as signals of information, and you cannot replace competition as a form of trial and error process, a way of testing different business models against each other, finding out gradually what works and what doesn't. That's something that socialist economies don't have, and to a lesser extent, that would also be true in a socialized healthcare system. It's not a big secret that the American healthcare system in particular has problems. Costs are extremely high, and there is an uninsured population. But then again, there are market-based alternatives to that. There are plenty of European countries that have market-based healthcare systems and that nonetheless offer universal access. So in Switzerland, for example, everyone has private insurance. Same in the Netherlands, in a different way, same in Germany. There are those models out there. You don't have to have a government take over and of the entire sector and have a state-run healthcare system. And we've got that here in Britain, but it's one of the worst healthcare systems in at least Western Europe, I would say. We've got longer waiting lists, worse outcomes.
Well, and point of fact, too, there was a story yesterday that NICE, and I prefer using NICE rather than NHS because it's so much more Orwellian. NICE, the National Institute for Healthcare and Excellence, that's what it's called. NICE is not so nice. A autism patient that was held in seclusion by the state-run health commissars for 3 years, and now you've got all these ministers rushing to apologize for it and say they're going to rectify the situation.
Yeah, that would be one of the more extreme examples. But of course, rationing is going on all the time. It is often the case that, for example, when a new medicine is introduced, that it's quite easy to get it in Western Europe, and in Britain it's only introduced with years of delay. And these are the rationing decisions that you have to make inevitably in a system in which everything is, in theory, free at the point of use.
But don't some companies offer private health insurance? So you don't have to use the government's?
Yes, you can get private health insurance through your employer, but only about 10% of the population have it. What happens is once you have a nationalized healthcare sector, there is little room for a private sector, and that means to the extent that it exists at all, it would be a luxury sector. So private healthcare here is associated with luxury. Whereas in other systems, for example, in Australia, about half of the population has private health insurance.
Mm-hmm. The topic of socialism and how it's sold, because it's being sold the same way again here, and I suppose the UK as well, the West in general. You make this point in your book about socialism, the failed idea that never dies. The reason it never dies is because people are always wooed by the good intentions, and whether those intentions are truly good or not, the outcome turns out to be the same.
Yes, absolutely. It has nothing to do with the intentions. I don't doubt that socialist revolutionaries of the past had good intentions. But it's just the totalitarianism is inherent in a planned economy. Once you do away with private property, once you do away with market signals, there is only one way left to coordinate your economy, and that is through command and control, and also the threat of, in the worst case, the labor camp, the forced labor camp.
The point of a government.
That's not a political choice. It's not that they come to power with the intention of building terrible dystopias. It's just that once you have no other ways, no market ways of coordinating economic activity, they find out that that's the only thing you have left.
How did you receive Angela Merkel's comments on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down, where she essentially tried to compare the wall coming down 30 years ago in Berlin to the wall politics of America today and walls that are being built to protect national boundaries? She essentially suggested that the walls shouldn't be built to keep people out, and that was the case in East Germany, when in point of fact we know it was quite the opposite, don't we?
Yes, the two aren't comparable. I'm not a fan of either wall, but I wouldn't compare them. I would oppose them for different reasons. But that's always the problem when you use a historical symbol like that and try to use it to make a point about political choices of today. It usually doesn't fit very well. There was a couple of years ago, Mikhail Gorbachev tried to do the same thing when he tried to reinvent himself as a climate change activist and tried to somehow make a leap from the Berlin Wall to climate change. But no, I would say leave those historical symbols in the past and to talk about them in the proper context. Don't try to instrumentalize them for point scoring today.
He is Dr. Kristian Niemietz. He's the head of political economy at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the author of Universal Healthcare Without the NHS, Towards a Patient